You honored thing, get on over here.
Tell them hello, Bill.
Don't want to be seen, so I'm not going to bring him business. I want to sit on the table.
Hello, I'm Pastor Jonathan Lamp for all of our YouTube followers. Thank you for joining us for Bible study tonight as we gather for the Shenandoah Chart's Bible study. Tonight we'll be starting at chapter 8, verses 14. Would I have someone that'd be willing to read verse 14 to 21?
I can do it. The disciples had forgotten to bring bread, except for one loaf they had with them on the boat. Be careful, Jesus warned them. Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that of Herod. They discussed this with one another and said, It is because we have no bread. Aware of their discussion, Jesus asked them, Why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but fail to see, and ears but fail to hear? And don't you remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000? How many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up? 12, they replied. And when I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many baskets full of pieces did you pick up? They answered, 7. He said to them, Do you still not understand?
Wow, so what did we just witness between Jesus and the disciples?
Well, they fully don't understand, if they don't have bread to eat, that he will provide for them.
Mm-hmm. Of course, what have they witnessed?
He's done it over and over again now.
And there's always some left over.
Yeah.
And he said he fed 4,000 and 5,000, that was just the men. Like all the women and the children, and they were there to witness it. What did he say to his disciples? You men of little faith?
So he will always provide more than what we need,
Mm-hmm.
an abundance.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like the disciples are kind of like thinking that, like, when's this going to run out? And they seem to miss what Jesus was even talking about watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. Yeah, so Jesus is comparing the work of the Pharisees and that of Herod to yeast. And of course we know that yeast makes bread rise. But in the Jewish culture and understanding that unleavened bread was very special. And why was that the case?
The Passover.
Passover,
Yeah.
yes. That was the bread they took with them in the Passover. It happened that way because that's what God instructed them, but also they didn't have time to bake big bread. They had to take what they had and run and go with what they had. So the yeast almost becomes a way to represent like a corruption of the bread, and that's kind of what why he's using this analogy, saying that the Pharisees are going to corrupt, and so beware of their corruption, along with that of Herod, the ruler of the people. Yeah, so, and it seems like the disciples, they're having a time trying to get it right. Yeah.
Very much.
Well, let's find out what happens next in verses 22 through 26.
They came to Bethsaida, and some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. When he had spit on the man's eyes and put his hands on him, Jesus asked, "Do you see anything?" He looked up and said, "I see people. They look like trees walking around." Once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes. Then his eyes were opened, his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Jesus sent him home, saying, "Don't go into the village."
Yeah, what do you make of this paragraph? What's going on here?
Jesus performed another miracle
Mhm.
on the blind man.
Yeah, he healed another blind man, but what makes this different?
He told him not to even go into the village.
Hmm. That's true. It seems like he's like, I'm not even gonna let you go into the village so you can tell other people what's going on.
Does that to do with how many was following? He didn't want a whole bunch more or around or whatever?
It seems like that's a trend that we see here in Mark, is that he's trying to hold off on the spreading and trying to keep things secretive, it seems like, because it seems like people are going to try to kill him to find out who he is. And there's something else I think that's really neat here. That is, you see Jesus lays his hands on him and he has spit on his eyes. And what happens?
He didn't,
He saw him.
he didn't see
Mm-hmm.
like he was supposed to.
Disciples only partially restored the first time.
Yeah, so it's like he was partly restored and yet wasn't fully restored. That's interesting, right? Do you think, what happened? Why was that the case?
Well, I think he probably was doing it in stages. The fact is, not necessarily testing, that's not a good word to use, but have the man see if he does have the faith that he's going to be healed.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't object, or he said, "I can't see." But when he could partly see, but when Jesus spat on his eyes, then he got to the point where he could see clearly.
He might have been trying to show them that spiritual healing don't take place right away a lot of times. And he was also showing the disciples, you're seeing miracles and not believing.
Mm-hmm.
He done it twice. A lot of his miracles he done twice. And
Yeah, because you go back into the first part that was read, he said at the bottom there, you still don't understand. He said, like he said, you stiff-necked people, you know. There's some verses in the Bible about that.
Yeah.
But he tells him, when they asked, they said they didn't have any bread, and he had already done twice with the bread. And he told them, he said, you still don't understand. And they didn't. They still thought they had to go get bread.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really appreciate your the thoughtfulness to this. I mean, I think I've heard some, try to say that like Jesus ran out of like powers. Like, really? And I would say that my seminary professor, Dr. Timothy Tennant, he actually did I believe a 39-part series on the Gospel of Mark here, or it was a really extended series. And one of the paragraphs he treats in that, throughout going through the whole book, was this paragraph, and he talked about how this represented the need for a second touch from God. And I mean, I can testify that I have needed a second touch from God in my own life. That it's like our faith grows, but yet it's oftentimes a process, and there's stages to it in our faith. So we accept God, right? And that's our, we choose to follow God. For some, it's a pretty distinct event, and it's a life-changing event. For others, we've just pretty much grown up in the church hallways and love Jesus. And that is known as justifying faith. And then there's, as we follow God, we seek God's regeneration. And there comes a time where we know that we're loved by God and that we are saved. And that's our time of assurance. And then as we continue to grow in following Jesus, we become more like Christ. And that's known as sanctification. So through that journey, it's a process. And that's a journey which we follow. And John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist movement, an organizer of it, spoke a lot about those different pieces of the journey. And I think that's really kind of been kind of a keystone of his work, is that he's talked about the journey of what it looks like to have faith and along the way. So we see that that Jesus is becoming more known, and yet he's still telling people not to talk about him or to go to other places. We see a turning point at this next point. Would someone be able to read verses 27 through 30?
I'll read it. Peter declares that Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. On the way he asked them, "Who do people say I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Peter answered, "You are the Messiah." Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him.
I like this scripture better in Matthew than I do here in Mark. Jesus calls Peter the devil. He says, "Get behind me, Satan. You believe it's the world thing, instead of the way of the Father."
So you like Matthew better?
I like that part. It's a little more like Jesus, hitting after Peter. He just gave Peter a key to the kingdom of heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's calling the devil because he just told him, when he asked the disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" Peter said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And he said, "No man told you these things, only my Father which is in heaven." And he said, "I'm giving you the keys to the kingdom." And I can't find anybody else in the Bible that's got the keys to the kingdom of heaven. But you go about 5, 6, 7 more verses, and he's telling you it's the devil. Why? Why is he telling him that? He don't want him to go and be crucified. We'll find that in the next verse.
Yeah. So we'll go ahead and move forward, if everyone's content with verses 31 through 38.
I'll read them so I can see them. Jesus began telling his disciples what would happen to him. And he said, "The nation's leaders and the chief priests and the teachers of the law of Moses will make the Son of Man suffer terribly. And he will be rejected and killed, but 3 days later he will rise to life." And then Jesus explained clearly what he meant. And Peter took Jesus aside and told him, "Stop talking like that." But when Jesus turned and saw the disciples, he corrected Peter, and he said to him, "Satan, get away from me. You're thinking like everyone else and not like God." And Jesus told the crowd and the disciples to come closer, and he said, "If you want to be one of my followers, you must forget about yourself. You must take up your cross and follow me. If you want to save your life, you will destroy it. But if you give your life for me and for the good news, you will save it." What will you gain if you own the whole world and destroy yourself? What could you give to get back your soul? Don't be ashamed of me and my message among those unfaithful and sinful people. If you are, the Son of Man will be ashamed of you when he comes into his glory of his Father with the holy angels.
Yeah, so I think you might have just heard something like a sermon on that. So, are there any thoughts about anything that catches your attention or anything else that you may think should be noted at this time?
Well, I think Jesus is getting more strict with his disciples now than what he had been, because he knows he's going to suffer, and he knows what's going to happen to him.
So you're sensing that he's kind of like, it's a way of him knowing that this is important, that the time is coming, and that he doesn't have much time left to teach the course of disciples. So
Not only teach, but convince.
yes,
Yeah, and he also, at the top of that, well, Sam read that one part, he said he called the crowd and the disciples.
Well, these were his followers.
Right. But I mean, he was speaking to both of them then, you know.
yeah.
And we're talking about a young man.
Yeah.
Jesus wasn't 33 years old.
Yeah. Yeah, began ministry about I think at age 30 is what it said. So, you know, that's pretty young.
Yeah, he only preached 3 years.
He'd been here long, we'd have a bigger
But he
book,
preached,
wouldn't we?
he preached several every day.
He'd been here long, we'd have a bigger book, wouldn't we?
Yeah, we have rolled in on a dolly.
Yeah.
But I know the Bible says that John was his favorite disciple, but he really cared for Peter. And Peter loved Jesus. He wasn't being hateful. He just didn't want him to go to Jerusalem and be back and be crucified. He didn't want to go back to Galilee. He said, "Where the people love you."
I like the part where it said, what good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? And it doesn't matter how much you got. If you don't save your soul,
Yeah. What can you pay for your soul?
right?
So, would someone be willing to just read verses 9, chapter 9, verses 1 through 13?
I'll do it. Jesus went on to say, I tell you the truth, some standing here right now will not die before they see the kingdom of God arrive in great power. And it's the figuration. 6 days later, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them up a mountain to be alone. As the men watched, Jesus' appearance was transformed, and his clothes became dazzling white, far whiter than any earthly bleach could ever make them. Then Elijah and Moses appeared and began talking with Jesus. Peter exclaimed, Rabbi, it's wonderful for us to be here. Let's make 3 shelters as memorials, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He said this because he didn't really know what else to say, for they were all terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, This is my dearly beloved son. Listen to him. Suddenly, when they looked around, Moses and Elijah were gone, and they saw only Jesus with them. As they went back down the mountain, he told them not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept it to themselves, but they often asked each other what he meant by rising from the dead. It says Jesus discusses Elijah. Then they asked him, why do the teachers of religious law insist that Elijah must return before the Messiah comes? Jesus responded, Elijah is indeed coming first to get everything ready. Yet why do the scriptures say that the Son of Man must suffer greatly and be treated with utter contempt? But I tell you, Elijah has already come, and they choose to abuse him just as the scriptures predicted.
So what captures your attention about this scripture?
Well, one thing, they recognized Moses and Elijah.
Yeah,
You know, they hadn't seen them, that was probably, 700 years between them.
yeah, I mean, Elijah got picked up in a chariot of fire
Amen.
nearly
He went
700 years beforehand, and Moses had been dead
God buried Moses.
for maybe 1,200 years or more.
It was like when Moses went up on the mountain and come back, he was white.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so,
Says dazzling white.
that's a good question. How do they know? It's just like, it's almost like they just knew. And like, unless Moses was standing there with his, holding a tablet of 10 Commandments, I don't. So,
But when you get to heaven, don't you think you'll know Jesus?
I see your point.
You know, Doug Guckenhurst used to sing a song a lot. When I get to heaven, I want to see Jesus. Oh, well, I was hoping he'd sing it Saturday, but. Yeah. But how did these two people?
That makes me ponder something that I've heard one of my seminary professors say, and that's that when we, in heaven, we're going to know our least relationship that we have in heaven, we'll know that person more than we'll know our spouse on earth. And that's just, that was just a profound statement for me, that we're going to know that person better than we know the closest person in our life, right now, as we exist here on earth. Simply because it's going to be perfect relationships through God. And we won't have the wounds and scars and the pain that we have here in this life covering up our, giving us blinders and keeping us from relating to each other. So, yeah. I mean, I'm still kind of processing that thought of just what the relationships are going to look like on the, when in the new creation, when heaven comes to earth and everything's brought together and everything's restored. So.
And in that time in history, you didn't have pictures.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there were some kind of drawings, but what you saw physically. And the only communication of what anybody looked like was passed down generation after generation.
Mm-hmm.
And you're talking about, what'd you say, how many, 1,200 or 1,000 years
Yeah.
that Moses had been gone?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a long time.
Mm-hmm.
When you don't have, and how are we gonna know Jesus? Is Jesus gonna look like, and I've seen probably 1,000, probably more than that, pictures how Jesus looks. And he doesn't look the same in all those pictures. And that wasn't a Polaroid, or that wasn't a picture off of from a camera. And how did they know that was Moses and Elijah?
Yeah.
And it doesn't say in the text that Jesus said, here is Moses and here is Elijah. It does not say that.
Mhm.
If it does, I haven't seen it.
He did say he talked to them though, and they may have picked up something from what Jesus said to them.
Mhm.
He did say he talked.
Yeah.
And that had to be passed down from generation and generation through family or through, people.
You know what you said?
People have like near-death experiences, they seem to recognize relatives that they had never met. and things.
Well, Janet, Betty's sister saw Jesus. Wayne saw Jesus.
And some people say they saw their grandfather, but he was younger than, they could have ever remembered him, or, stuff like that, so,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
What you said about pictures and all. Look at today what you got. Like that, you can bring somebody up, talk to them where they're at
Oh,
and all.
yeah,
and,
yeah, yeah.
You know, they didn't have, like I said, they didn't have nothing like that then.
He don't even answer you.
Yeah.
But God didn't plan it that way,
No.
believe me. How much faith would we have if we could explain everything?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Why would we have the 4 gospels instead of just have one that's always the same?
And part of
We
this
wouldn't read it, we would not try to understand it.
that we read earlier, I was thinking about all the modern methods and technology we got these days, right? Okay, and he's still saying something about we still should have more faith and somebody can be healed without an operation or something, you know what I'm saying? Put more faith in that, in him?
Well, this happened in my family. My mother wouldn't go to the doctor, she just couldn't stand it anymore. I didn't blame her faith, and I didn't blame her preacher and the people that come. She believed the Lord would heal her. But here's the thing, she tempted the Lord. He didn't give you that surgeon, he didn't give you that person to take care of you. He didn't have the lifeguards, the school teachers and all this, the preachers and the churches, for us to question him. And to this day, I feel like my mom, if she had any sins, that she was saved, that was one. She tempted the Lord. They got her to the hospital, it was too late. And the doctor looked it up and said, if I'd have got our week sooner, I'd saved her. And put her in heaven, and said, but I didn't all that, it got into the system, and but she saw an angel. I'm questioning mine,
I mean, what I'm actually trying to say is, I know we've got all those physicians and everything, but he's also saying that we gotta put belief in him more too, you know.
Amen, but you still got, he didn't give
I
us,
know you have those, yeah.
he didn't give us Jonathan just out of obscure blue,
Right.
clear blue sky, or any other pastor, or any other leader.
He
The
fell out,
Lord provide for us if we just open
he
our
fell
eyes
out
and
of a
look
car.
around.
He fell out of a car and stopped,
Well, we
stopped
have-
right there on 211.
Did you hit your head, did you?
And
Central
school teachers-
Avenue.
School teachers is about as bad as people in West Virginia. At 45,156.
Hey, don't
Yeah.
talk about West Virginia.
Yeah, that's bad, ain't it?
Okay, hang on one second.
It's probably a good thing. It's probably a good thing.
Oh, okay.
He's talking about West Virginia.
I didn't see God, I didn't see Jesus, but I saw a bright light.
Mhm.
I said, God, what's happening? And I felt arms go around me. And that's how I remember the wreck. I don't remember the pain, I don't remember the sounds, I just remember that.
Mhm. Yeah, it's amazing how God, holds us in really difficult and terrible times, and how God can save us. And I do want to have a word about, I think, to my understanding and to my faith, I think we should trust the Lord, but also, we also are called to respect the resources that we have and the skills that people have. And so I would be very comfortable with going to a physician and praying, I know, and that believing that God can work through a doctor to help bring healing. I think in fact there's a book that was written between the Old Testament and New Testament. There was a bunch of Jewish writings. And one of them is called, there's several books called Maccabees. And one of them, it talks about, to my understanding, pray and also take your medicine too.
I had something happen to me, I told Sam about it. When I was working on the rover, I'll never forget it. I had a dump truck driving, had 12-ton blacktop boat coming down, you know where Goonie Creek's at, coming out the front roll? Rear tire blowed out. And the guys told me when I got down the bottom hill, said, you did a heck of a job. I said, no, I said, I think someone up there was looking over me, because any other time, that thing would have been over the bank. Just wasn't time for me to go yet, I guess.
Were you hollering, Jesus, take the wheel?
Yeah. But I mean, I told my boss when I got back what happened, he said, you're lucky.
That does sound like a miracle.
Especially when you got that tonnage on there and the tar blows out on the rear end.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I like about the poem, about the footprints. He's there when we don't even know he's there. He takes care of us when we don't even realize it.
Yeah, there's all of us at one time or another in our lives do foolish things, and we just take it for granted. Well, it wasn't supposed to happen to me or all this. They never say, well, the Lord wasn't ready for me. Yeah, we don't give him enough credit, I say.
So would someone be willing to read verse 14 through 29?
I will. The bottom of the mountain, they found a great crowd surrounding the other 9 disciples, as some Jewish leaders argued with them. The crowd watched Jesus in awe at this, came toward him, and they ran to greet him. What's all the argument about? He asked. One of the men in the crowd spoke up and said, Teacher, I brought my son for you to heal. He can't talk because he is possessed by a demon. And whenever the demon is control of him, he dashes him to the ground and makes him foam at the mouth and grit his teeth and become rigid. So I beg your disciples to cast out the demon, but they couldn't do it. Jesus said to his disciples, oh, what tiny faith you have. How much longer must I be with you until you believe? How much longer must I be patient with you? Bring the boy to me. So they brought the boy, but when he saw Jesus, the demon convulsed the child horribly, and he fell to the ground, withering and foaming at the mouth. How long has he been this way, Jesus asked the father. And he replied, since he was very small and the demon often takes him off, fall into the fire or to the water to kill him. Oh, have mercy on us and do something if you can. If I can, Jesus asked, anything is possible if you have faith. The father instantly replied, I do have faith. Oh, help me to have more. When Jesus saw the crowd was growing, he rebuked the demon. O demon of deafness and dumbness, he said, I command you to come out of this child and enter him no more.